This is calling to order the December 18th Montecito Planning Commission meeting. Pledge of Allegiance, please. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. TV coverage announcement, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning to the Commission. Montecito Planning Commission hearings are televised live on County of Santa Barbara Television, CSB TV, Channel 20, at 9 a.m. in the South Coast, Lompoc, San Ynez Valley, Santa Maria, and Orchid areas. Rebroadcast of Montecito Planning Commission hearings are on Fridays at 5 p.m. and on CSB TV, Channel 20. And today's hearing will also be streamed live on the county's website and the county's YouTube channel and will be available for download in a day or two. Now for roll call, Commissioner Keller.
Here.
Commissioner Kupiec.
Here.
Commissioner Police.
Here.
And Chair Sanauer.
Here.
And for the record, Chair Newman will be just a little late today.
And if we could have the agenda status report, please.
Good morning, Madam Chair. In regards to the status of the agenda today, there's one item on the consent agenda, and then on the standard agenda, we have a number of items that have been listed on the agenda for as briefing and informational reports, and some actions. A resolution is being brought forward on item number 1 for the members of the Montecito Planning Commission to look at, and then we do have the director of the county's Public Works Department and coming in to provide an informational briefing on projects. And so, and we do have our reoccurring planning development website demonstration that is on the agenda again. Everybody's excited for that one, maybe to happen. Other than that, staff is ready and prepared to discuss any of those items today.
Thank you very much. On to the projection report, please.
So, Madam Chair, members of the Commission, today is the last hearing of the Montecito Planning Commission for the year of 2019. After we adjourn today, we will be meeting, the next meeting will occur in the year of 2020, and that has been set for January 15th. And there is currently one project projected for that date, and that is the Hawker Philippides property line adjustment that was heard at an earlier meeting and was continued, and based on information from the applicants, it was asked to be continued to the January 15th meeting. And then after that, our next meeting will be in February, on February 19th, and the Long Range Planning Division has projected to be able to come and provide information to the Montecito Planning Commissioners in regards to the update on the 2019 Comprehensive Plan Annual Progress Report. And that's as far as the projection report goes at this time.
Thank you very much. Any questions?
No questions. I just want to note that I will be out of the country for the January 15th meeting.
Thank you. And Chair Newman has just arrived, so please, we are at the, any public comment? Commissioner Keller, are there any comment slips?
We have no comment slips at this time.
Thank you. Is there anyone present who would like to come up and speak and fill out a speaker slip later? I see none. Public comment is closed. Thank you, Chair.
Good morning. Sorry for being a bit late. All right, proceeding to agenda item 8, Planning Commissioners Informational Reports. Are there any reports anybody would care to share? Commissioner Keller.
I just wanted to report on the meeting of November 25th of the San Ysidro Roundabout Committee, Subcommittee. Unless you had that planned for another time, I thought this would be a good time to mention that the full committee met. Shall I go ahead?
Please.
We had a site visit as well. We rendezvoused at the Montecito Public Library and then took a site visit down to the intersection of North Jameson and San Ysidro Road, which was very, very informative because it gave us a much better sense of the layout of the roundabout. It's actually much further to the west than I think we realized. It will be heavily landscaped. We discussed safety concerns. We were particularly focused on pedestrian safety and trying to figure out the best way to get pedestrians safely across from the roundabout. We have then went back to the library and continued our meeting, and we talked about signage, with the consensus being that we wanted the fewest number possible so it wasn't unsightly but still quite clear what directions were. That we talked about lighting because that has always been a concern, although now that I've seen the Christmas display at the Rosewood Miramar, I'm thinking, how can people complain about lighting on the roundabout, because that's pretty bright. And so we doubt that the lighting for the roundabout will be any brighter than is currently seen on the south side of Jameson. And then once again, we went clearly through the landscaping, and they're being quite generous with size and the variety that we would hope to find. And so it should be an actually very well planted and presenting area for the landscaping. And including details like split rail fencing and hatch marks on the cement, on the asphalt, so it looks a little more textured. Lots of thought has been put into this design. And I think we all feel that the county has made every effort to make it attractive and appealing and acceptable to the Montecito residents. So, Commissioner Senauer?
Yes, thank you. Also part of the working group of MPC on this San Ysidro roundabout, I want to emphasize that pedestrian safety and access is probably the key point that we basically investigated west and east and what would be the safest for the pedestrians. And it's imperative, I think, that this get resolved, and working together, it appears, that will come up and the county with the safest approach for pedestrians to cross the roundabout in a method that will not put them in harm's way. Thank you very much.
Council.
Yes, Chair and Commissioners, I would just like to clarify for the record that the working group that Commissioners Keller and Senauer are is describing, pardon me, was convened in order to provide the applicant, Public Works, with information about aspects of the project that would be of interest to the decision maker, which is your commission. So the Montecito Planning Commission is a decision maker on this project. And so I just wanted the record to be clear that what's being described are elements of the project that Public Works would be incorporating into the project proposal, that the working group is not the decision maker on the project, and that those aspects of the project presumably would be part of the project that comes before your commission as the decision maker. Thank you.
All right. Anything else on this topic from anybody? For myself, if I may, could you advise us whether there are any future meetings planned and whether your working group's work is done, or what any timetable might look like if you know? Thank you. Commissioner Senauer?
As far as our working group, the next projected meeting is with MBAR, projected at January 9th, but that's still in flux. So as far as our working group, it has actually, I believe, come to a point where it can be forwarded to MBAR. Thank you.
And staff, is there any sense at all of timing as to when this project might be before us?
Chair, new members of the commission, I don't have that timeline today.
Okay, thank you. All right, any other commissioners have informational reports to share? Commissioner Senor?
We had the community meeting, which it was well attended. It was our very first inaugural, and I think the community participated, and the staff certainly had presentations that were they informed the community, and I believe it was a success, and I hope it is repeated. Thank you.
Any other commissioners' reports? All right.
May I just ask a question, please? Since the last meeting on the 12th was a special meeting, will there be minutes or any other sort of record that we will be seeing in terms of as follow-up?
So, yes, but that's something I'll have to discuss with the chair about the level of detail that the want in the minutes. But yes, just 6 days really wasn't really enough time for you guys to consider that today.
No, I'm not holding anyone responsible. I just wondered, we don't usually have special meetings, so I was wondering how those were handled in terms of our record, et cetera. So thank you. We'll look forward to those later.
All right, then, let's proceed on to item number 9, the minutes of the prior meeting, regular meeting, that is, of October 16th. Are there any comments, additions to the minutes? Commissioner Senor.
There's in item 8, in informational reports, it's simply a typo, but it's about the 7th line, a possible PSP, I believe it's PSPS, on October 18th for parts of Minnesota, parts of Montecito and Gaviota. It's just the letter S, I think. Thank you.
Any other corrections, additions to the minutes? If not, the chair will entertain a motion to approve the minutes as corrected.
So moved.
All right, it's been moved.
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Nay? All right, the minutes are approved. Directors report. Board of Supervisors hearing summary. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. I wanted to say that I'm sorry I missed your community meeting. I had an engagement in Northern California that I had to be at. So I'm glad that it went well and that there was a good attendance. I think that's valuable for the community, and I anticipate that it would be nice if we could do something like that on an annual basis or something, just bringing the meeting to the community and helping them connect with the commission a little bit more. So congratulations on the success.
And thank you. And let me just interrupt on that note, if I may. I want to thank you and the department and staff for the support. As I said in an email, this was a heavy lift. It was in a venue that nobody's familiar with. There were logistic challenges and a number of things, but I think it was informative for all of us. I think staff literally put their shoulder to the wheel here and got it done and did it well. And we are appreciative. I think the community is appreciative, and I want to thank you and all the staff for that.
You're most welcome. I think I should pass those thanks along to Mr. Wilson over here, because he did the bulk of the work, and also Mr. Villalobos. Yeah.
Chair and Director Plowman, I can't take all those. I appreciate that, but we had, we're doing shout outs. We had some staff that I think designated a lot of time. Supervising Planner Tess Harris and Will Brown provided a lot of support. So I'd like to, for sending things around, I'd like to acknowledge them as well.
And the CEO's office for coming, OEC.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
I wanted to let you know that on the 10th of December, the Board of Supervisors approved the ordinance amendments for our cleanup package that also included the telecom. One thing I wanted you to note is that Supervisor Williams brought up the recommendation that the Montecito Planning Commission had about co-location. We had some discussion about it, and we agreed that we would be as we're developing these objective design standards that we need to prepare, we will be considering co-location as when we write them, and trying to figure out a way to design them so that it references that We do have that section in our ordinance that actually already requires it where it's feasible. So it's just going to be something to complement that, and that was a way to try and address some of the concerns that the Montecito Planning Commission had. It didn't change the code, but it was just a commitment that we made when we're developing those standards. I wanted to let you know that it's an item that is of interest to people in Montecito. It's not a Montecito Planning Commission item, but the heliport for Mr. Nesbitt was denied by our Planning Commission, County Planning Commission, and then Mr. Nesbitt has appealed that to the Board of Supervisors. So that will be heard sometime in the first quarter of this 2020. There were a lot of people from your community, from the Montecito community, that participated in that hearing. And I think that rounds out my director's report. I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right. Any questions? For myself, if I may, two things come to mind. One, we all received notice of some changes in the... Sorry. Breakfast must be ready. We received a notice of changes to the long-range plan, I believe.
Oh, is it an update?
So I'm wondering if you could fill us in on what that entails and what that might mean for the Montecito plan area. And then number two, the telecommunications, I did indeed watch that meeting, and Supervisor Williams and the others did want the co-location to be part of their action. And you, as you reported today, there will be standards forthcoming. Will those be shared with us? And if so, what's the timing?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I need to coordinate with long-range planning on what the timing of the development those standards are. I don't know what the process is at this point forward, but we'll certainly discuss that with them and talk about the process. They typically would not be something that is adopted or acted upon by our decision makers. We could provide a briefing to you on what we include in those objective design standards.
The reason I ask in particular is that, as I understand it, any appeal from a determination with respect to telecommunications in our planning area would come to us. So therefore...
For small wireless facilities.
Right. So therefore, it's important that we know what the standards are to apply in our decision-making in the future. So it's not just an idle curiosity. I think it's a necessity going forward. So we may well be a ways off in terms of the pipeline before anything gets to us in that context, but I did want to share what I believe is an actual need and not just a curiosity to be scratched.
Yeah, no problem. Let me make a note of that.
And then you were going to fill us in on the long-range plan amendment.
So, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, it was a memorandum from our department explaining where we are in the process with the long-range planning work program. And there are a number of items. I don't have it all in front of me at this point in time, but it's my recollection that there isn't anything specifically focused on Montecito per se that's moving forward right now, although there will be items that are sort of county-wide, things like we're doing new thresholds for vehicle miles traveled, because I don't know if you know this, but under the California Environmental Quality Act, when you used to assess traffic impacts, you would use a level of service at intersections to determine whether there's an impact. Well, at the state, they decided, you know what, that's really not an environmental impact. What an environmental impact is how many miles are traveled to and from a project site, right? So they changed the standards in CEQA to say, if your project produces a lower amount of vehicle miles traveled because it's closer to the urban core and it is close to services, it will produce less traffic. That is the standard we now measure projects against. So it's vehicle miles traveled. So things like that will be coming through the Planning Commission. But I don't have anything specific that I think is directly affecting Montecito in a way that I need to be briefing you on. I do want you to know that we're going to be moving towards, right now we have a 1-year work program for long-range planning, and virtually maybe 1% of those long-range planning projects are actually 1 year. So we're going to move to a longer-term work program. We're looking maybe about 3-year work programs so that the board and the planning commissions have a real understanding of the length of the time of these projects and the allocation of staff. Not that they don't get that in the 1-year work program, but there's sort of a thinking behind that. If it's 1 year, you have an expectation that these projects are going to be moving and wrapping up in a shorter time frame. And I think it'll just give us a longer picture of what's happening in the division. So if you have any specific questions about any of the items that were in the memorandum, I'm happy to respond to those.
Okay. Any questions or other comments? I'm sorry, I have one more. You mentioned staffing, and I know, in fact, it was mentioned in our public meeting, we've had a lot of additions to staff. And we know it's all hands on deck and additional hands on deck for cannabis. Will any of the additional staff and new hires be involved in long-range planning and the work of our commission?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, our long-range planning staff actually fortunately has been quite stable. So we haven't lost any positions. We will be looking at our budget for the next year. We're starting that budget process. And if we think we need to add more staff or would like to add more staff, we will include it at that point in time. Certainly the more staff we have, the more we'll be able to get done. One of the things that we're working towards right now is bringing consultants on call for our department. And what that process entails is we send out an RFP. We got 17 responses to those from different consulting firms. And it essentially brings firms on to be an extension of staff. So we are going to be bringing 3 different consulting firms on contract so that if we have long-range planning projects that are languishing that we need to get done, we can bring those consultants in and they can assist us with them. If we have an overabundance of permits and our caseloads are higher than is efficient, we can bring on contract planners that can come in and process cases or do environmental documents for us. So we just finished all those interviews. We've selected the firms. They're going to be brought under contract in the next 2 months. So that just gives us elasticity, right, when you have surges in
Okay.
applications.
All right, any other questions?
I'm just curious
excuse
about,
me.
sorry, if you don't mind, somebody.
Commissioner Keller?
Yes, that sounds like an interesting solution. Does it mean that these firms are on retainer, or just so they just know that they are on call if you need them? And so presumably that's more cost effective than adding staff.
Chair Newman and Commissioner Keller, it is more effective, right? You get an immediate assistance when you need it, because recruiting for staff can be quite lengthy, and finding the right staff can be challenging for a particular project, especially if it's a large, complex project. So, yes, I mean, they're on call. We have a contract set up with them. We don't have to proceed with a contract when we need them to do the work. We just call them. We say, here's a project we have. We give it to them, and they process it. So it's not a desire to not be able to add staff, but when we add staff, we want to make sure we actually have a long projected anticipated increase in permits or increase in work or additional funding to keep them on for several years, because you hate to hire staff and then have something happen and you then have to let them go.
Thank you. No, I think it's very inventive and a good solution for these kinds of problems. Thank you for sharing.
Sure. Happy to.
All right, thank you for that report. Let's now move on in the agenda to item 11, the project status update, please.
Good morning, Chair, members of the Commission. I don't have anything new to update on that one. We do have another application was submitted for the NETS project. An emergency permit was submitted, but I don't have any information, and we can brief you on the next hearing in regards to status of that. And that will be, the follow-on permit for that emergency permit would be coming to your commission anyway. So we'll keep you apprised of that.
Okay, thank you. All right, agenda item 12, consent agenda item. We have item C1.
Sorry, just getting ready. The following is a hearing on the request of the applicants Brian Wolf and Michael Gruning for a 12-month time extension for lot line adjustment case number 15 LLA 1, and to accept the previously adopted CEQA exemption pursuant to section 15305 of the state guidelines for implementation of the California Environmental Quality Act.
All right. This is a consent item, so we'll first inquire whether there's any public comment on the item. All right. Seeing none, unless anybody would like for this matter to be taken off the consent agenda, we'll then proceed forward. All right. Fine. We'll then go to our standard agenda.
So, just before we go to our standard agenda, before we move on, we do still need a motion to approve.
Okay. All right. Motion to approve consent agenda item C1 is entertained.
So moved.
I
Been
second
moved.
the motion.
All right, been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Okay. Opposed? Unanimous. All right, we'll call the standard agenda now, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Montecito Planning Commission will discuss the issue of compensation of Montecito Planning Commission members for attendance at meetings, review of materials, and preparation for each meeting and mileage.
All right, as a bit of a refresher on this, at our last meeting, the commission passed a motion to request compensation from the Board of Supervisors for service. Staff volunteered and has prepared a resolution that is before us in the form that has been both reviewed by staff, myself, and council. And we're now here to have discussion on this topic. The bottom line of the resolution is that it proposes that we receive members serving, rather, the appointed members of the Montecito Planning Commission receive reasonable compensation for their service as determined by the Board of Supervisors. So first, is there any discussion regarding the form of the motion or any comments that anybody has? All right, Commissioner Keller.
As I reported at the last special meeting, I was there when the bylaws were drafted for the Planning Commission, and there was a specific agreement that we not be compensated. At the time, I didn't fully appreciate that how much other elected bodies, similar boards, or even the County Planning Commission was compensated, but I understood the motivation for choosing not to be compensated was a concern that this might mean that the Board of Supervisors would see this as an additional expense and would not grant us the status of the Area Planning Commission. Even though it was acknowledged that this would greatly relieve the load of the County Planning Commission, because at that time, the County Planning Commission meetings used to go way into the night and involve much time of the members as well as staff. So I think this is a very desirable thing, having served on the Fire District Board and having been reasonably compensated. It's not a lot of money, but it acknowledges the time we spent in preparation and attendance. However, I'm concerned that the issue still remains with the Board of Supervisors, that they would see this as an increase in cost, and I feel that it would not be a good thing if we propose this and they then turned us down. That would actually be worse than not raising the issue. And I understand that it's been hurtful when certain members of the community have referred to us as volunteers. But the fact is, all of us have expertise in regard to our community, and we have been willing to volunteer our time. And volunteering one's time does not mean that one is not expert. So I am very torn as to whether or not I should support this resolution, since I feel that it would be a very bad move if we advanced it and then it was voted down.
Any other discussion or comments? All right, if Commissioner Kupiec.
I don't recall in the last conversation that we had whether this
Talking to the mic.
this motion or this concept extends to the other components of Montecito, like MBAR.
My recollection, and as reflected in the minutes, there was discussion about compensation for MBAR, but was decided and advised that that would be a matter for MBAR to take up on their own and for their own right, and I understand they have done so, and that we would address only the compensation of the Planning Commission.
I think that's great. I mean, I think to be consistent with the other bars, because I do, having served both now here and at MBAR, I think that the work of both bodies is consistent with the other Planning Commission members and other MBARs that are compensated. So I think in terms of consistency and in terms of the type, quality, and necessity for the work that those bodies do, I think it is consistent that these bodies be remunerated all in the same way.
All right. At this juncture, seeing no other discussion, of course, Commissioner Keller.
I'm sorry. I do have another question. The amount of compensation that is set forth here, is this consistent with the County Planning Commission? How do we arrive at these numbers?
To respond, there is no amount indicated at all. It is just suggested that it be reasonable compensation.
Well, it does mention the amount of $300 for each meeting for the County Planning Commission, and $50 for a review and $50 for additional meetings. So is the intent to leave it up to the Board of Supervisors to come up with an amount, or is the intent for this to be the suggested amount?
It is the intent, as expressed in the actual last part of the resolution, that it be left up to the determination of the Board of Supervisors. All right. The chair will entertain a motion to approve the resolution in the form before us.
I so move.
It's been moved by Commissioner Kupiec. Is there a second to the motion?
I second.
All right, been seconded by Commissioner Police. Any discussion on the motion? Commissioner Senauer.
Yes, I'm somewhat supportive and conflicted on this. The predicate and the bylaws were clear when MPC was formed, that this would be not being appointed to MPC, there would be no compensation. And I understand the basis for the resolution, and I think a reasonable compensation that the board could consider or would consider in their judgment what it would be. And I don't think it's necessarily what PC commissioners or et cetera, other appointment bodies receive. It should be matched, or whether it should be matched. But I would be comfortable with supporting the motion that whatever, if the supervisors come to a reasonable compensation, whatever that is, I would be accepting. Thank you.
Okay, any other discussion? Let me just add then for myself that this resolution was not prepared and did not originate in a vacuum. The chair consulted with the Office of Supervisor Williams about this matter. After reflection on the nature of the service, the time expended, I believe, quality of the work performed both by this current commission as well as our predecessors. And as reflected in the whereas provisions, I believe that both my colleagues today and those who have preceded us have served with distinction, have devoted substantial personal time to prepare for meetings, to go to site visits, to be aware and available to our community. And I believe personally and support the motion that reasonable compensation to be determined, of course, by the Board of Supervisors is appropriate and is something that is necessary and desirable. As to the amount of compensation, that is left up to the discretion, of course, of the Board of Supervisors. And I would hope that with the support of Supervisor Williams, that colleagues who serve with him on the Board of Supervisors would likewise support this should it pass. So with that said, unless there's any other comments, we have counsel would like to speak, please.
Yes, Chair and Commissioners, I would just like to confirm, my understanding is that the motion is to approve and adopt the resolution, and as stated in the resolution, to direct planning staff to transmit that resolution to the Board of Supervisors.
Thank you. All right, any other discussion? All right, if not, then let's proceed to a vote.
Chair Newman, do we need
Okay,
to
excuse
revise
me.
the motion?
Pardon me?
Do we need to revise the motion to be approve and adopt?
The motion is to adopt the resolution in the form before us.
I just was going to incorporate the language the council has given us, that's all.
Well, that's in the resolution. All right, we'll call the roll, please.
Commissioner Keller.
Abstain.
Commissioner Kupiec.
Aye.
Commissioner Senauer. Commissioner Puliche.
Aye.
And Chair Newman.
Aye.
Motion passes 401.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's proceed then to agenda item 2.
The Planning Commission will receive a report from Planning and Development Department on rebuilding after the Thomas Fire and January debris flow.
Mr. Wilson?
So Chair Newman, members of the commission, may I request a 3-minute break as we get our IT situated?
Sure. All right, we'll be in recess.
Chair Newman, members of the commission, we would like to introduce Supervising Planner Tess Harris. She'll do a brief presentation. This is the same material that was presented last Thursday. For those that didn't attend it, we'll provide an update for the members of the public that may be watching it or reviewing it at their leisure through CSB TV. Anyway, I will turn it over to Supervising Planner Tess Harris.
Good morning, Chair, members of the Commission. Nice
morning.
to see you all again. So this slide shows the safety inspections. It depicts the report that we generate that shows the comparison of the initial safety assessment from the current status of the same structures. So you can see this on the next slide graphically. This pie chart, the pie chart on the left shows the original inspections. It represents the number of structures that were initially tagged as red and yellow during safety inspections done after the Thomas Fire and debris flow. And then the pie chart on the right shows the current inspection status for those initial inspections that are shown on the left. So since the original safety inspections, there's been a 41% reduction in structures that were red tagged and a 12% reduction in structures that were yellow tagged. And the pie chart on the right shows that 53% of those structures are now green tagged. So this next slide shows that since the debris flow, 73 applications for planning permits for reconstruction were submitted. There were a total of 63 applications for like exemptions, 45 of which were issued by December 9th of this year. And then there were also 2 applications for land use permits and 8 applications for coastal development permits. 110 building permits were applied for, 97 of which were issued. And then in addition to those permits, there were 182 counter permits. This slide shows the trend in planning and building permits that have been applied for and issued for properties affected by the debris flow. And this data spans from February of this year to December of this year. So in looking at the graph on the left, in February, 42% of the permits that were applied for were issued. And then by December, that number had increased to 71%. So the number of building permits, and this we're looking at the graph on the right here, also gradually increased with 90 permit applications submitted by February and an average of 2 applications submitted every month thereafter. And then the amount of over-the-counter permits stayed relatively the same. There are about 4 applications that had been submitted during that time frame. And so this slide, the disaster case status summary, shows that the county has been able to contact 460 property owners or their representatives out of 524. So many of the properties have either finished repairs, with 59% of the properties indicating that they don't require any more work. About 19% of the cases are inactive currently. And then planning and development staff are working with owners, with about 10% of property owners to help them rebuild. And these are the cases that your commission has reviewed from January 2018 to the present. Then this is a list of all cases reviewed by the Montecito Planning Commission since January 2018. So 9 planners were assigned to these cases. And then this slide shows you the general permit process flow chart, and it gives you an idea of, depending on how you wish to rebuild or repair a structure, what type of permit might be required and whether or not you would need to go through the Montecito Board of Architectural Review. That's the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, we can answer them.
All right, thank you, Ms. Harris, for that report. Any questions from commissioners? For myself, I have 2. One, both since our public meeting and otherwise, have there been any increase in the outreach to those members of the community affected by the Thomas debris flow who had not contacted their liaisons? And then number two, there's a deadline of January, is it the 9th, I believe, for people to either begin construction or apply for an extension for non-conforming use structures. Has there been any uptick in applications for an extension?
Sure, Chair Newman. So that is our main focus right now, since we're fastly approaching January 9th. We have gotten a couple people come in with a request for extension through multiple different planners. And so each case manager is working with those that were impacted that they're assigned to, and taking those requests for time extensions in. And I just, again, want to make sure that the public is clear and aware that the request for a time extension is only applicable if your structure is non-conforming or if you have a non-conforming use. So if you are, if your structure is not in that category, you have you don't have to, you don't have a time limit to rebuild. Anyway, we're working towards the January 9th deadline, and members of the public can submit a request for a time extension to their case manager, and then we will follow up with them individually.
All right, good. Commissioner Keller?
Thank you. I was very surprised and dismayed to hear about the problem with the tax basis for people whose homes were completely destroyed and were having to rebuild. That's something I don't think I certainly didn't anticipate that and didn't realize that would be a crippling issue. Do you have any idea what the progress is on that? And is that anything that your office has been involved with?
Chairman and Commissioner Keller, our office has not been involved in that. That is something that's being addressed through the assessor's office. So our office doesn't have any involvement in that aspect of it.
I see.
And I don't have any information today on.
Okay, no, it's just that we did all the like-for-like provisions. We didn't realize that one thing would not be like, and so that's a huge stumbling block, and I was not aware of it. So I'd really like it if you had or hear of information, if you could get back to us with that, because that's a huge concern.
All right, any other comments? Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Harris, for your presentation, for the information. All right, moving on, our standard agenda, item 3, please.
The Planning Commission will receive a report from the Public Works Department on flood control projects, transportation, right-of-way projects, and survey control within the Montecito Community Plan.
All right, well, thank you. We're very pleased to have Director McAlpin from the Public Works Department and others who have joined him here today for an informational report. We're looking forward to hearing about projects in and affecting the Montecito community. So without further ado, please, Director McAlpin.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Commissioners, thank you very much for the invitation today, and thank you for allowing us the opportunity to provide some information about what we do in Public Works, and specifically what our plans are in the future from a Public Works perspective for Montecito. And it's a short presentation, but I'm sure you'll have some questions, and we're happy to answer those questions. And I brought 3 of my outstanding leaders from Public Works that kind of make it happen every day in Public Works across the entire county. To my left, Chris Stedden, he's the Deputy Director of Transportation. Next to me is our Deputy County Surveyor, Danielle Madlovsky from the County Surveyor's Office. And I have Tom Fairham down here on the right from Flood Control. So certainly we're active in every community around the county. I think last time I counted it, we probably have 13 or 14 unincorporated communities that we take care of. Everyone's different, and they all have different needs. And we try to do what we can with the limited funding that we have to balance those needs across the county. What we planned this morning was kind of 3 really quick informational items, kind of a perspective look of where we're going in the future. We'll talk a little bit about some of the response, specifically in the surveyor's office to debris flow, but Tom's going to kick it off first and give us kind of a quick snapshot of what the future holds.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Faven.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the Montecito Planning Commission. My name's Tom Feyram, and as Mr. McAlpin indicated, I head up our Water Resources Division, our flood control district. So in Montecito, if we start looking forward, we've identified several projects that we're going to be pursuing, and of course, what's the critical element to these projects is the funding that's associated with that. So these projects that I'm talking about first all have FEMA hazard mitigation grant fund applications that are pending for those. Most of these projects revolve around debris basin work. I'll just start from west to east. Up in the upper left of this diagram is our Cold Springs debris basin. We actually have two projects that we're proposing on that basin. One is an incremental increase of the footprint of the basin within our existing right-of-way. And then the second one is an operational improvement to modify the dam outlet to make the project behave more like we've talked about the Gubernador Basin in Carpinteria, where we've successfully modified that basin to trap less of the fine-grained sediment and trap the rocks, which is what we're after. Then moving to the east, our San Ysidro debris basin, we're proposing again the modification of the dam and the outlet works to behave better with large debris and be able to trap more large rock. To the south of that is the proposed Randall Road debris basin. Very large grant application in with FEMA right now, and that project is pending, seeking the approval from the Corps of Engineers and National Marine Fisheries. That's the first step to getting to the FEMA funding. Moving to the east, our Buena Vista Creek Basin, which is off of Park Lane. That particular road crossing in effect acted as a de facto debris basin, but it plugged the culvert and access was really difficult to get in there and clean it out. So our proposal is to actually design access and ramps and protect the culvert so that it doesn't plug and allows the water to go through, but keep the debris back. And then to the east, Romero debris basin. Again, that's an operational improvement project to modify the dam, as I spoke about before, and also improve access within the basin itself as there. And in fact, if you go out to Romero Basin now, you'll see that we in fact have since poured a concrete road up to the basin. Very steep access into the basin, very difficult right after a rainstorm for trucks to climb that grade. Now we have an actual road so that when there's a storm, we will be able to get in there that morning, just as we have in the past. We have some projects down below the Highway 101 that are going to be dependent on what Caltrans does. Caltrans is proposing to increase the bridge capacities through those areas, and if that happens, that'll open up an opportunity to improve the capacity through that area to the beach. And then I would just close with another long-term project that we're working towards is looking at all of Montecito's creek systems and debris basins and look at where are there improvements to the capacity of the system, what would that look like, how much would it cost, and that's a longer-term project that has yet to be kicked off, but this is the time that we need to start looking at some of that. So I think with that, I'll stop. I don't know if we want to have questions individually or wait till the end.
I think if we might, we'll take them topically, so maybe
Okay.
we'll take questions now.
Very good.
All right. Commissioner Senor? Oh, I'm sorry.
This way.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Thank you. May I speak?
Please.
You said the bridges south of the 101 that you have noticed. Can you be more specific about where those bridges are?
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Keller, the 101 bridges themselves.
Oh, themselves across the freeway.
Themselves across the freeway as a part of the freeway construction. If they are able to upgrade the capacity of those creek crossings of 101, then we will be able to look at matching the capacity down to the ocean and see what that looks like.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Commissioner Senor?
Actually, Commissioner
That's okay,
Pulice.
ladies first.
All right, thank you. Thanks very much. I have a question about the operational improvement as far as the culverts go. Is it aperture? Are you looking to increase the actual dimensions of what we see as basically a large tunnel on all of them, or what are the different approaches? Per basin, different, correct?
Yes. The idea on these projects, and now I wish I would have brought a picture of the Gubernador, is that the existing debris basins actually have a culvert through the dam. That we find plugs very rapidly, and that causes our problem. Our approach is to actually notch the dam to a width of about more or less 10 feet. It'll vary depending on the hydraulics of each of the creek systems. But it actually notches the dam and allows a freer flow of water through the debris basin. Now you might say, well, why would you do that? And the answer is it does not, these debris basins do not slow down or attenuate any water. We have a spillway where the water simply goes over the top. By notching the dam of the individual debris basin, it keeps the velocity through the basin at a somewhat higher level so that the sand and the silt and the stuff that we don't want to catch passes through. And that, in effect, opens up the capacity of the basin to capture more of the larger rock, and that's what we want to do. So it actually removes that culvert, and you would have a vertical notch through the dam. And that's proposed on each of the three existing basins. And then on the proposed Randall Road, the net effect is it'll be constructed that way. There won't be a dam on the Randall Road project, and it accomplishes that same goal.
So the notching is the preferred approach?
Yes, it is.
All right. And the second part of my question is, with debris flow, if in fact it happens, is there any part of this project in grant proposals to FEMA to deal with debris disposal long term, recommending sites, having a plan rather than just on the side of the highway or Goleta? Is that part of your approach in any way? Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Sendler, thank you for asking that question. That is really one of my highest priorities because it's one of our biggest problems. It's fine to build debris basins, but if you don't have a place to put the material and you have to haul it to Buellton or Ventura County, what good is it? It'll bankrupt us. So we have made applications to FEMA for debris disposal funding, and those were not forwarded. The debris basins were, but the disposal was not. However, this is a strategically important issue that we have to deal with at the county. And keep in mind, it's for debris flow, it's for normal flooding, it could be for earthquake, it could be for a number of items where we need a place to be able to sort and move material. And we are actively working on that with our General Services Department. And it's so important that we will not wait for a grant. If we have an opportunity to acquire the right piece of property, we will do that without a grant. It's too important not to.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question.
I
You're
think
my
it's
hero for asking that
It's
question.
of great import. I have a question. Did they comment why it wasn't forwarded?
I think they have particular outcomes that they're looking for, which when you look at, let's say, from a flood control aspect and you have a project that improves flood control or debris conveyance, they look at that and not necessarily a project that would put the debris, because that would serve other purposes. And so I don't think it meets their goals. But so I was disappointed in that. But I would have to say for our projects that we have applied for, most of those have been forwarded through the process, and there is a funding outlook that has very high potential.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner Pulice.
I'll try to be brief, Tom, but to follow up on her question, is there any budget that you guys might have, or is there to purchase property or to put something in a lease program with any of the property owners in the county?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Pulice, our funding, at least in the flood control district, is we have reserves in the various funds that we call upon for emergency or capital projects as they become available. So we have reserves now that if a piece of property were to become available, we would be able to release those reserves and buy that property. Conversely, if there was a lease option with a property owner, we could potentially look at that. I think maybe an easement might be a preferred option, but we actually have had leases with other property owners in the past. I would say I would, number one, prefer to own it. Number two, prefer to have an easement over it, and then a lease if that's the only option and the property is ideal, then we would be open to that.
Right. Well, thank you for that. A couple other questions. Regarding these projects that you have in front of us, is the timetable basically not set by virtue of FEMA's schedule, or do you have prospective dates for bidding these projects?
So now I will try to work off of memory. We are hopeful on the Cold Springs Basin, the farthest west, for the footprint increase. We are hoping for this summer. So that would be summer of 2020. The Randall Road Basin, assuming that we are able to get through the permitting process and get the FEMA environmental process done, we are targeting 2021 for construction of that. The other basins would be in the 2021 to 2022 time frame for construction. So keep in mind, I would add with a FEMA hazard mitigation grant, when they finally approve the project, you have 3 years to deliver it.
Right.
So if we get the money, then it has to happen fast.
Okay. And so will all these projects be hard dollar bids?
They would be bid pursuant to the public contract code, so they would be lowest responsible bidder.
Right. Okay. And then finally, with the time since the flood of 2 years now, have you had conversation with Caltrans regarding alternative disposal of stormwater in the 101 freeway that we don't have at the moment? Is there any modifications been proposed that you've put forth to the Caltrans regarding flood control?
So through the chair, I believe our discussions with Caltrans have been related to the bridge crossings and ensuring that they look at the capacity of those bridge crossings and increase those where feasible. I don't know if that answers your question. Relating to Caltrans right-of-way stormwater disposal, we typically don't get involved in that with Caltrans. We are proposing a meeting with Caltrans to get an update on where they are on their bridge design and the overall project, how they're going to handle, flood flows. But I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Well, that partially does. My final thought is that from a planning commission, from a Montecito Planning Commissioner's perspective, I would wish that, with our experience of the flooding and the 3-week closing of the freeway, that we would have some alternative to remove that water besides the way we did it the last time. And I just think we should go on record as making that as a request from a planning commission perspective, that we look at alternatives. But anyway, thank you very much.
And I'll just close through the chair that when we meet with Caltrans, we'll bring up that issue. Obviously, that's a concern to everybody. I hope it's a concern to Caltrans too.
Thank you.
And for myself, before you leave the podium, Mr. Fayram, for those members of our community who might want to give public comment to the approval authorities that you outlined in this process, one, I assume public comment to whether it's fish and wildlife or others would be appropriate and could be received. But two, is there direction you might give as to when and where that comment should be directed so that members of our community who are supportive of the project, or for that matter, if there are any opposed to a given project, they might let their voice be heard and aid the process itself?
Mr. Chair, all of the environmental documents that we would do for each of these projects have a public comment period. We've started that process on the Randall Road. We had a scoping hearing, last February. We will have a draft EIR in 2020 for that, and we would welcome public comment. For the Cold Springs project that I talked about, I understand we have a negative declaration that will be coming forth for public comment. Somewhere in early to mid-January of next year, so just a couple weeks, that negative declaration will be out for public comment. The other projects will have their own environmental document. I don't have a schedule for you on those, however.
Okay, thank you for that information. And then one last question for myself. With respect to the ring nets and their performance in the rains of late and so on, had they indeed been loaded with debris and unloaded? Could you at all share any information about their performance to date?
Yes, Mr. Chair. So the ring net projects are targeted for debris flow, and so they're actually offset the bottom of the creek. They want those flows to pass through. So my understanding is none of them have been loaded with the storms of late, and I would add, nor were they designed to address those storm flows. Those storm flows, for instance, of last year, the smaller debris and some of the debris that came down fell into the debris basins as planned. We mobilized, I think, 6 times through last year to do that work, and so they're working. The basins and the nets are working together exactly as proposed.
Good. All right, appreciate that. Well, thank you for that update on flood control.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Director McAuliffe?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Commissioners, and thank you, Tom. Great presentation. And I think Tom was a little humble on the operational improvements, too, because taking that gubernador idea and taking it across Montecito for the system as well, you know, from a scale perspective, we had to remove about 500,000 cubic yards of material in the debris flow across this county team, contractors, the Army Corps of Engineers. And if we can continue to get the water flowing through those basins and take the silt downstream, instead of us having to haul it, it's going to reduce the amount of truck trips on the road system tremendously if we have another debris flow. And when you look at the scale of 500,000 cubic yards of material being moved, and if you assume a truck holds 10 cubic yards of material, that's 50,000 trips that this road system didn't see. So it's a perfect segue into Chris getting up and kind of giving you a look at what we're doing within the community of Montecito today and where we're going to go in the future. Not to talk specifically about projects, because you've had briefings on roundabouts and 101, but more what's happening back in Montecito on the arterials, collectors, and things like that. So I'll turn it over to Chris now.
All right, thank you.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
So I'm going to run more through a list format, since I know you all are very familiar with the geography and the roads in Montecito. But if you you need clarification on specifically road segments or things like that, I can just point it out over here. As Scott said, mostly what I have for you is things related to kind of maintenance projects we're doing, and then we're still doing repair projects from the debris flow period. So, and some of those we're kind of meshing those together. If you've been on Olive Mill lately, you've seen it's been repaved. We also shifted the curb line over to the west a little bit to do 2 things. One, it allows for a walking path on the east side of the road, and informal walking path. And then secondly, there were concerns about speeds on Olive Mill, and so we narrowed the lanes a little bit, which tends to kind of help slow people down a little bit, creates a little bit of side friction. So we're achieving 2 things with that. And then in addition, getting the structural capacity back for the roadway. There was a lot of hauling going on that road over the last 2 years, so it kind of degraded faster than it normally would have. So we got a new good thick structural section on it. What you'll see later in the spring, is the similar type of thing going on from the triangle up north to 192. So that segment right there, and then reconstructing the curb around the triangle there. And there's a lot of people parking there and stuff right now, but that'll all be back to the way it used to be with curbing. And then we're working with different people, including Casa Dorinda, to get that triangle planted back and looking a little more landscape than it does right now. There's some other projects I know. I'm kind of going off of the list of things that I'm hearing about from the community. So I think it might be good things for you all to know about. But if you have other things that you're hearing about or projects that you need updates on, just let me know. San Isidro Lane, which was also highly impacted, we're going to be repaving that in the early spring. as well, hopefully. And there's obviously various bridge rails throughout the community are still out. Those are in the process, various stages of being approved through the FEMA process for replacement or repair of the guardrails, of the bridge rails. We've done some of them. One of the questions that comes up is when you're replacing these rails, how do you decide if you're putting the same railing back that was there before, which usually is very non-standard, older railing, versus putting in, the new railing that's a little more robust and has, the approach rails on it and everything else. Generally speaking, it's related to the kind of the amount of damage that was done to the rail. So if you look at, like, for example, Olive Mill, the bridge on Olive Mill near the debris basin where there's K-rail right now, both of those rails are gone, completely gone. When you put those back, you have to bring the whole railing all up to current standards, which means, new standard load rating railings. It'll have approach rails on it and all that kind of stuff. If there's a railing on some of those higher up bridges, like some of the Mountain Drive bridges where some pieces of the railing got knocked off or elements of it got knocked off, and we can put it back, the using the same railing that was out there but restore it to the pre-storm condition, that's what will be done. So that's the distinction between the different kinds of rail projects that we're doing. And then, for example, like Jameson Lane, most of what happened there was just the approach railings got damaged, so those will be replaced with current standard railings. As far as bridges go, well, let me just say one more thing about roads. We're also looking out into the future. We have a lot more road work that we would like to do, and that probably needs to be done than we have funding for. So the focus has been on getting the haul routes addressed as a top priority, and then moving to some of the more local roads after that when we have funding to do it. So the next road that we would like to do, and we have annual process we go through of prioritizing roadways and seeing what funding's available, and then attacking those roadways. Romero Canyon is definitely high on the list. It's a very rural, very kind of country lane road that also happened to have a whole bunch of trucks running on it over the last 2 years, and it just was never really built to kind of handle that. So that's kind of a big project that we would like to see done, but we're just gonna have to see where and if funding materializes to do that kind of work. As far as bridges go, we are currently nearing completion of the Ashley Road reconstruction, so that should be open probably January, depending on the weather over the next month, and some utility stuff that we're working out. But we're aiming for January for that. The Cold Springs Bridge at the Cold Springs Crossing, where the trailhead is there, that bridge is going to be a while. It's actually not it's not an emergency bridge project. It's in the Highway Bridge Program, which is a much more lengthy process. You have to we're out of the emergency permitting phase, so you have to do all the environmental stuff and all the permitting and all the right-of-way stuff that kind of ends up taking a few years. What we are going to do is open the access to the trailheads on both sides of the creek. That should be done in the next week. And then we are looking at putting a temporary bridge there that could handle bicycles and pedestrians, and potentially be used like in emergencies if the bridge needed to be open for emergency access or something like that. So we would try to get that in before, probably wait till the end of this rainy season. That channel actually changed a lot since the initial debris flow in terms of how it's scoured out and changed in size. So we're kind of waiting for that channel to settle down a little bit so we know what the final length needs to be. But after this rainy season, we'll probably try and get the temporary bridge in, so it would be up for, in the summertime, hopefully. And then the other bridge is the bridge behind San Ysidro Ranch also on East Mountain Drive. And that one, again, we're not looking at putting a full vehicle access bridge back. If you're familiar with that, it actually has a gate on the west side, and you can't drive through there anyway. But we are looking at getting a bicycle pedestrian bridge put in there. That's probably in the 12-month area. We're working through the design on it, so it kind of depends how the design goes and looking at environmental and things like that. But we're hoping to get that one in let's say the next 12 to 18 months. And what we're the design we're looking at right now is similar to the temporary bridge but permanent, where we have a bicycle and pedestrian access bridge, a bridge that's maybe 12 feet wide, but also could handle the loads if for emergencies, if like emergency responders need to use it or something, they could open the gates and go over it. But not a vehicle bridge, but a bridge that could handle the loads of vehicles in emergencies. I think I'll stop there and see if there's anything I didn't cover that you were hoping I would.
All right, thank you for that report. Commissioner Keller, I think you were first to light up.
First on off the start. Speaking of this bridge at San Ysidro Ranch, can you tell us what they've done in terms of replacing the gas line that used to run through the previous bridge?
Sure, yeah. So the new gas line goes under the creek, and they put in they put in the gas line, and I think they put concrete armoring all around it, and then they armored the slopes around it to the creek slopes around it as well. It's on the upstream side of the bridge, so the new bridge wouldn't have any utilities or anything going through it.
So the two were quite separate. Good.
Correct. Yes.
Good.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering, we just heard the report from the director that CEQA has changed the definition of, rather than level of service on intersections, they've changed their guidelines to being distance. And I'm wondering if that changes your assessment of any of the local roads, because some of the projects that you had were based on a level of service.
So I think the CEQA determinations you're referring to are primarily development related. So we are going through the process of seeing how that changes our review of developments as they come through, more so than evaluation of like current roadway systems. So it's more of a framework for how you analyze developments to see what their impacts are to transportation.
By developments, you mean private property developments?
New developments.
New development. So you would still be using the level of service as a measure of the effectiveness or the need for improvement in various intersections in the community.
So, is it okay if I don't? Okay. So it's a little confusing. First of all, we're very early in this whole process. And secondly, it's a little bit confusing because we all have been trained to think of level of service as a CEQA within the framework of CEQA. What this new VMT analysis does is it changes the CEQA aspect of traffic impacts to look at VMT. That doesn't necessarily, the level of service impact, which generally comes out of things like community plans or county general plans or things like that, those conditions can still be applied to developments. They just don't fall under the CEQA framework anymore. They fall under the community plan framework.
I see. Thank you.
Is that right?
All right, Commissioner Police, I believe you were next.
Okay. Yes, hi, Chris. Thanks for the report. I have a question, and I think it's commendable that you waited so long to make these pavement improvements, considering all the traffic that's been on our local roads. But I was just wondering, when rocks or stones, large 1 to 5 ton stones, are sitting on private property, I guess you can't force someone to move those. And so if you say, at Olive Mill, for example, in Hot Springs, is there still a large supply of rock on the northwest corner that did not get removed just next to the creek? Is that there for a reason, or is that private property, or is it maybe it's already gone and I missed it the last 2 or 3 weeks?
So the last time I was out there, which was probably a week or two ago, there were a bunch of rocks on the private property side. In terms of the transportation side of things, where we get involved is if the rocks are within the clear zone or they start getting too close to the road where they become fixed objects or hazardous to the roadway operations. in this particular case where they're, back or
Yeah.
away from the road, or once they're on private property, we don't get involved with those from a roadway side.
However, if, say in 6 months from now, he decides to move those large, heavy stones and it does damage to our brand-new asphalt roads, is there anything we say about that, or how does that work?
That's a great question. So, as long as people are hauling legal loads, they don't need any special permission to do that. If they start doing something that, big hauls of, 100, bigger, when you get into the thousands of yards, say, or something like that, then we can look at permitting. And the way we look at it is we look at the road before the haul starts, and we look at it after, and if they've done anything to damage it, then we take a look at that.
So, for example, on that particular supply of stones, would they have to acquire a permit to truck that off the property?
Not as long as they're using, legal load trucks.
Okay, but you wouldn't.
I'm talking about road permitting. I don't know about
land use or whatever.
I don't know any about grading.
Okay, because a lot of those stones are very heavy, and you can typically add more weight to the truck than, say, a gravel or asphalt would have in the bed. So, anyway, your pavement improvements are remarkably well done, and thanks for getting it done.
Thank you.
All right, any other comments from commissioners? Commissioner Sanauer.
Thanks, Chris, for your update. I have a question. You regarding referencing on Olive Mill a bit of a modification to allow for an informal walking path. Could you go into when you consider doing that on roads and the difference between an informal walking path and a formal one like we see on North Jameson now?
Sure.
Thank you.
So, and that's a good clarification because, let me just start by saying that there's always been a desire, as is spelled out in the community plan, to have Montecito be a walkable community. And there's been obstacles in the past to that happening. Two of the primary ones being it was very challenging to do because there were a lot of encroachments that have been built over the years that have been created, kind of a pushback against using the right, even though it's road right away that is, by the community plan intended to be used for creating walkable spaces, has been really challenging and controversial. If there's any silver lining of what's happened in the last 2 years, it's that the road right of way has some of those spaces opened up that weren't previously, that we can kind of start looking at as we're going through these improvements. If we can make minor modifications to what we're doing, we can actually put these things in that have been in the community plan for 25 years. The other obstacle is funding, and there isn't a specific funding source for these types of improvements, and the way that they are getting done now is through a collaboration and a partnership through like the Bucket Brigade and the Montecito Trails Foundation, who have stepped up to do not only the improvement work but also the maintenance work, which is, I guess, a second/third obstacle of the funding. So you have the funding obstacle for initially building things, and then you have the long-term funding thing. Well, the county doesn't build decomposed granite paths for the long-term funding aspect of it, and just not just money but resources. We don't have people who can be constantly out, doing the work that decomposed informal granite pathways need. So really the confluence of having the room to do this a little more opened up than it has been in the past, and the community efforts between what the Bucket Brigade is doing and what the Trails Foundation has stepped up to commit to, that's kind of allowed the opportunity. And the reason it's more informal is because that fits in more with what the community is looking for. versus like say a concrete path or a paved path, which is what really the county is more in the business of doing just for maintenance reasons.
So when you're talking about the modification on Olive Mill that providing a walking path was not the predicate for doing this. It just, you modified it for transportation and circulation, and it turned out that you were able to then to add a quantity of feet, whatever it is, to provide, what is the distance of the quote walking path in this? Does it go the entire length from the Hot Springs Olive Mill intersection? Is that where it is, all the way down to, or is it a short section, or?
Correct. Both of those are true. We, through the course of having to put the curb back anyway, we saw that and wanting to kind of narrow the road anyway, we saw that if we did all that in conjunction with each other, you could get about by moving that a couple feet and then going a couple feet into where the encroachments are, you can get a 4-foot path through there, informal walking path, while we're doing work that has to be done anyway. And the limits are from North Jameson up to the Triangle to the Casa Dorinda work that they did. And then the project that's coming out in the spring could potentially take that from there up to 192 on the east side of Hot Springs as well.
Thank
doing
you.
The same thing.
One more follow-up. Is there anywhere on your website, how do you communicate this to the community if in fact there's, sort of interest? Is there any way for comments or community meeting? Because pedestrian access safely is a part of the community plan of great import. So do you sort of outreach for that, or is it just up to, say, North Jameson, which was basically a private collaborative, and a lot of the community were not aware of the process? Is there any way to sort of inform the community of that?
I see Director McAlpin.
If I could real
I
quick,
thought
yeah.
maybe you wanted to address that.
Absolutely, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Senar. I think, this being an informal path, I mean, the way I kind of look at it is, staff got creative. They're able to kind of move the alignment a little bit and get us a little more shoulder, right? Because, on rural roads, we find pedestrians are walking within the bike lanes and the paved shoulders of the road, and we want to do whatever we can to make the road in that situation safer for people. So this really, it's not really a formal capital project. It's more just a quick safety improvement, getting an additional 4 feet of shoulder that gets the pedestrians off of the pavement and makes it much safer for the pedestrians to use the road. There's good examples of formal paths that we put in. San Ysidro path, Chris kind of touched upon it, where we put decomposed granite in. We worked with the community on that. But you need to understand on that one costs probably on the capital side 4 times as much to construct than what we normally do around the county. And the operations and maintenance costs are sky high compared to typical path work that we do. And Chris nailed it on partnerships, because our world in transportation has changed over the past couple decades. As costs continue to go up, but our revenue streams have really been stagnant. In fact, without the state over the past couple years approving SB1, we had lost about 60% of our buying power in state gas taxes, and that was our lifeblood to do the work that we do in the county. And this certainly isn't isolated to Santa Barbara County. It goes across the entire state as well as the country. And when we look at working in the transportation field, and we look specifically at funding, we look at it like a 3-legged stool. So the first leg is local funding, the second leg is state funding, and the third leg is federal funding. Our Board of Supervisors, I think it was about 5 years ago, established a policy to take 18% of the unallocated revenue on any given fiscal year and put that into deferred maintenance. So transportation gets a big piece of that, general services, as well as the Parks Department, because we have, I think it's when you look across those three needs, about a little over $400 million in deferred maintenance in the county. So that's been a big shot in the arm, as I mentioned, SB1. And then we're working at the national level now, working with Congressman Carbajal, who's now vice chair of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, to work on getting some federal funding subvented directly to cities and counties around this nation, a lot like state gas taxes. The federal government has never done that for maintenance purposes. It's always programmatic, project specific, and it's an application process. So if we're successful with that, that could be a game changer. So unfortunately, we don't have a whole lot of flexibility for bells and whistles, but we want to take advantage of every opportunity we can to make the entire public right-of-way safe for every user. And if we can get them on a 4-foot dirt shoulder, I'll do that any day of the week.
All right, thank you for that. Commissioner Carr, before we come back to you for a second round, let me recognize Commissioner Kupiec.
I haven't had a chance to ask about anything about this.
Commissioner Kupiec.
Having, I'm sure you have many scars having suffered through the San Isidro walking path. I mean, I certainly remember that. I was on the school board at Montecito Union at the time that work was being done. To kind of echo a little bit about what Commissioner Sedauer just said, though, I think that community input in those projects, even if it's to make the community understand what the increased costs are for maintenance of some of those operations. I mean, I think that the North Jameson walkway, happy as I am to have it, and much as I commend everybody who put their shoulder to the wheel to make that happen, it is in no way the same quality as what happened on San Isidro Road. And I think that the reason that the quality of San Isidro Road's walking path is so much better is because there was community input. They were minor changes in terms of landscape and shape. But I think that, to abrogate any square foot of public space to a process that doesn't include kind of as much design input as we can have over something like that is always worthwhile. And the community needs to know that there's a cost for that. Not only an initial cost, but an ongoing cost. But something tells me that within the community that we live in, that people are interested in that. They're very interested in that. And they're interested in the quality of what things look like when they're done. And personally, I think that that's a process that needs to be kind of shepherded and enhanced carefully, because I think that community input's good. I mean, I think if MBAR had been there for North Jameson, it'd be visually better than it is now. Much as we're all happy to walk that straight path, I mean, a few minor changes to what went on there, I think would have made a great improvement. And I'm unhappy to see that improvement was missed. And I think it gets missed when there's not enough community input.
And Mr. Chair and
Please.
Commissioner Kupiec, beyond right-of-way constraints, because certainly that's always going to limit what we can do as far as meandering is concerned. I think you hit on essentially the topic I was talking about, costs, right?
Right.
So, and we are very fortunate that we have people like the Bucket Brigade in the
Sure.
community and the Montecito Trails people who are stepping up to help us, and they're absorbing some costs. But beyond that, today, if we had to go through that process for the San Isidro path, I think I would be in front of the community saying that we would like to establish a financial partnership, if you will, because we had to go turn over every stone, use maintenance dollars from Montecito to build that path. If we could get private funding to come in and help us, we are welcome, or we would welcome that contribution to help us with projects.
And I think if the community knows that that's part of the partnership agreement, I think
Right.
that we live in a community where people would step up to the plate.
And beyond that as well, some communities, Chris and I were talking before this a little bit, they have CSAs, community service areas, where they assess property owners, and it generates revenue to allow us to, public works, parks, and other needs to enhance projects or build projects that probably wouldn't have been built without that funding. So, perhaps that's a bigger topic for another day for the Montecito community to talk about. That provides a lot of flexibility.
I think every community needs to learn how to work hand in hand with its local government.
And that's what my team is really good at. You know, as I mentioned, we work with a lot of unincorporated communities around the county. None of those communities want to be compared to the other, you know, and they all have different needs, and we try to work as best we can with them so they can, you know, provide their identity, if you will.
But I can tell you, in the post facto era, in an era where everybody was opposed to that walkway, there was so much consternation about putting a walking trail in Montecito, and now that it's
Which
done
one?
on
The
San
San
Ysidro,
Ysidro, yeah.
San Ysidro, everybody loves that trail. You know, there are more compliments heaped on you and everybody involved in that project because it looks great.
Well, Chris and I think we're front line on that when it was going down, and we had a similar issue in Isla Vista. We put the first traffic signal within IV, and I remember going to the IVCN and saying, "Trust me, it's going to be great," and that was the wrong thing.
Well,
to
sad
say.
for you, you've created the gold standard
Yes.
on the San Ysidro Road that every other project will be measured by.
But you know, we can use that, I hope, to maybe create some meaningful partnerships on the financial side to help us with costs.
I would hope so.
All right, Commissioner Keller.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out that the community plan doesn't specifically refer to walkable. They refer to having no sidewalks and no curbs. And there, unfortunately, since the Jameson Lane went in almost overnight with no public input and with no process, and I asked about process here in the meeting because it seemed to just occur, there is a lot of public opposition to the Jameson Lane, and there will be a lot of opposition and very great concern if you proceed in a same fashion with what's going up Olive Mill Road, because that is not what the community plan calls for, and it is not what people in Montecito want. So what Mr. Kupiak is suggesting of making it more of an open process, I think there is funding available privately, and not from two small, quite unrepresentative groups like the Trails Foundation and the Bucket Brigade. I mean, these are groups that have their own agendas and do not represent the entire community. The Montecito Association was not even involved with this, and you didn't consult with the Planning Commission nor the Board of Architectural Review, all of which would have made for a better looking process and a better process and a better looking result in North Jameson. And yes, it was cheap, but it looks like it was cheap compared to San Ysidro, which, as Mr. Kupiak referred to, is the gold standard. So I really truly believe there are funds available, there are other groups that would like to get involved, and it's very disturbing to me that you might be ready to proceed with this just because the space is available and there are two small groups who are willing to help fund you to create a completely different look for that area, because you can put in what may be decomposed granite, but to many others look like sidewalks, which is specifically against what the community plan calls for. So I don't mean to pile on, which I'm doing, of course, but I just think that it's very, very important that we have more community input, and that I think once you do that, once you make people aware that, yes, we admit this is expensive, but if you want the better look, pitch in. I think the funds are there. I think the individuals are there who would pitch in to make it have a result much more like the San Ysidro that you created. And so I hope you can do that. Thank you.
All right. Council, do you want to speak?
Chair and Commissioners, I would just remind the Commission that you are agendized to receive an informational report, to receive a brief report from Public Works on individual projects, and we are not noticed to discuss or provide direction on any individual project, and that any such discussion, I would recommend that it be deferred to a properly noticed agenda. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that. All right, and then lastly for myself, I have just two questions. It's readily apparent, given our experience with the Thomas debris flow, that the line between transportation and flood control is not all that distinct. And in that regard, I'm looking very far into the future. I'm wondering if you might know, and if so, could share with us whether both Caltrans and SBCOG is rethinking or taking into the design of the 101 the flood control, critical flood control needs of our Montecito community. Obviously, having a chain link fence along North Jameson didn't do much at all for our community. So I don't know whether in the construction of sound barriers in the future or otherwise, there are flood control aspects, drainage, blockage of that nature or otherwise that are now part of the calculus that might not have otherwise been considered 2 years ago.
I think I would have to defer to Caltrans on the specifics of that. I'm not intimately familiar with the details to which they looked at things like that for the freeway project.
All right. And then secondly, there's been some discussion, particularly online, from members of our community who have accused, and I personally believe falsely, Public Works of inordinate delay in the bridge completion and openings and so on. And I'm wondering what you might want to say to address that criticism.
Well, I don't know if they're confusing us with Caltrans on the 192 or not, first of all. But secondly, in Caltrans' defense, these are a lot more complicated projects than they seem. And I will just say that on average, a bridge replacement project takes about 10 years. That's like the average time it takes to replace a bridge. Caltrans just replaced 5 bridges or 4 bridges in 2 years. That's pretty good. We replaced Ashley Road we got Ashley Road into construction in about a year and a half. So, bridges are complicated projects, and getting them done quickly with good quality and safety and everything else incorporated is a challenging, and permitting and environmental stuff is challenging.
Okay, thank you for that. Well, thank you for the update with respect to those projects. Director McAlpin,
Yes.
survey is next topic.
Yes, it is. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, right after the debris flow, we realized we had a pretty big problem in the watersheds that were impacted. All of the public survey control had been wiped out. So our county surveyor's office went to work and they put together essentially a 2-phase project. The first phase was to go in and put the Montecito control network back in. Very important, because if you as a private citizen out there wants to survey your property, typically they come in and the surveyors come in and they set up on the monuments that are in the public right-of-way. Well, since those were wiped out, they'd have to go a half-mile away and pull those survey control points in, and it could cost a private citizen thousands of dollars to do that. That's incumbent upon the public government in our domain to make sure that those controls are in place. So that was phase 1. Now we're working to put phase 2 on the street, and it is to essentially reestablish the boundary lines of our road right-of-way. And I don't want to steal any more thunder, but our Deputy County Surveyor, Danielle Matlovsky, will kind of explain the details of that. And also our County Surveyor, Alex Yevremovich, is here as well for any questions. Danielle?
Right. Thank you. Please.
Thank you, Mr. McGolpin and Commissioners and Chair. My name's Danielle Matlovsky. I'm from the Santa Barbara County Surveyor's Office, and as Mr. McGolpin indicated, the Thomas Fire and debris
Could you,
flow.
excuse me, could you, that's
Bring
it.
this
Thank
closer.
you.
The Thomas Fire and debris flow did cause extensive property damage, and monumentation was destroyed through the debris flow efforts. We've established a control network that has been recorded. That took about a year process. That control network provides survey discs evenly spaced over 60 miles. There's 60 of them throughout the neighborhoods. Those control monuments provide critical elevations that are necessary for floodplain certification and rebuilding, and elevations have become a significant issue for the community. So that's a huge advantage that would otherwise require static observations, long leveling loops, extremely expensive operations to be able to get accurate elevations to the sites. With that in place, we've really focused our next efforts on phase 2, which is to reestablish monumentation for the roads that are the public arterial structure throughout the Montecito area. Road right-of-way is essentially the frontage to many of the private properties in that area, although the county's not coming in to resurvey everybody's individual private property, just like they're not coming in to rebuild everybody's house. This does provide significant spatial framework for those people that need to reestablish their property boundaries, setbacks, any other considerations for where are their limits of ownership or land use. We've been able to pursue this project through funding from a FEMA grant, and that funding we've been able to strategically separate the area into what we're calling 3 sub-phases. So instead of hiring one company or sending one crew out there to spend the next 10 years trying to monument all of Montecito, we've been able to prepare a process that will approach the project in parallel, so that we have these 3 sub-phase areas, not that we have the map up, where we're actually allowing the survey work to happen simultaneously, hoping that we can be able to achieve the remonumentation within a year. I don't mean to get too long-winded. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to address them now.
All right, thank you for that information. Any questions or from commissioners? Commissioner Senor?
Thank you very much for your presentation. Question about the control monuments,
Yes.
which are basically a predicate for elevation. Is that what you said? Elevation basis going forward?
They tie into the
Correct.
elevation framework that FEMA requires
Right.
people to document.
And how are these secured?
They are anchored into the ground several feet. They have been reinforced with protective housing around them, so
Okay.
many of them actually have monument well lid covers. There are a few of them that are installed in bridge abutments or other hard fixed assets that are readily accessible, and it would take destroying those concrete fixtures to remove the monuments.
So they're secure in the face of adversity as far as floods and debris flow.
That was the intent, yes. That
Okay.
they're not just simply a nail and tag that can get scraped off the pavement.
And they're also tied in with digital. You could probably GPS them, that sort of thing.
Yes, in fact, the record of survey that records documents their state plane coordinates, elevations, and that people can come out with GPS survey equipment, conventional traverse equipment, load those coordinates and elevations, and observe the whole area relative to that framework.
Commissioner Keller?
I was going to ask you about GPS because I'm assuming that's what you're using to a great extent. Is there going to be anything online that individuals can access to see this sort of thing?
Currently, the record of survey is available online. We've been working without GIS staff, but we've been preparing an interactive data set that will be available through our spatial index. At this point, the record can be found on our geodetic survey control page, but ideally there'll be a dot that you can click on and the coordinates will be right there available for your use.
Well, that'll be excellent. Thank you.
Certainly.
And may I just ask, have there been any surprises? 2 things. Have there been any surprises with roadways, which you were referencing earlier? And then in what areas and by how much have elevations changed?
So 2 questions. The roadways, we've focused on the roadways that have been FEMA funded, and those tie into transportation project corridors so that we're working in concert with the improvements that are currently happening. There are a number of roadways that are FHWA or other funding sources that were not in the lens of this approach that we've taken. However, we were able to fund the control network through monument preservation funds and not be held up through a grant funding process, and that allows us to set a spatial framework that other surveys and surveyors can interrelate their surveys together. Not sure if that completely answers your question.
I guess maybe I didn't make myself clear. I was just curious as to whether or not you found that roadways had moved over the years from initially being set, if there was any change, significant change in right-of-ways or in location of roadways. I mean, my own private lane, for example, does a dogleg down the private lane, and I'm just wondering if you ran into that in any other situation.
We've basically been relying on the historic record of the public right-of-way frameworks, and so over the course of roadway usage, sometimes those traveled paths may meander due to trees or boulders or use of the land itself. But primarily, the framework that these roads have been established through date back into the early 1900s, 1800s, but may be coming off of historic farm lot descriptions, and so the nature of how surveying used to be described from that tree to this rock has gotten much clearer with the artificial monuments. So back in the days of early surveyors in the county, there were strategic monuments that were placed to help with those original farm lots and the original subdivided lands from the public land survey system. Not to get too technical about it, but there was farmland grants and Spanish land grants, and there was the public land survey system. And so those two different survey systems have provided a framework where if you've got a 20-foot road corridor that's been described relative to those farm lots, that 20-foot road corridor is still a 20-foot road corridor. But where exactly that 12-foot lane is within that 20 feet may have varied significantly throughout the decades.
That's kind of what I was thinking, so that's very interesting. Thank you. But and the other thing, have you discovered areas in which the elevation has significantly changed as a result of the debris flow? I'm just wondering, in terms of the rebuilding, how many people will be affected by that elevation change?
Sure. So two different things. The monumentation may be deep within the ground, and that those bedrocks, there hasn't been significant seismic activity to cause lots of upheaval or subsidence. However, the debris flow, we may find that some of those monuments are now under 8 feet of muck that has since turned to pavement as it's all dried out. So relocating some of those property corners can be extremely expensive and cumbersome to both excavate the soil out as well as potentially reestablish monuments that may be destroyed during those excavations. So in the process that we've been going through, we did a small leveling loop where the control network that we have recorded was verified, and we had very, very tight accuracy within our leveling and the documentation there. The resolution of many different observations over the years, there may have been sort of arbitrary benchmarks put in for some of the bridge crossings, and in 1983 there was a horizontal spatial system that had a vertical in 88, and so the framework with which elevations have been defined, those elevations themselves may have not changed radically, but the values may be stated slightly differently. So I'm not sure if what you're asking, the monuments may not have moved, but we may be observing them in a different reference frame.
Right.
So we've been correlating all of those elevations to come up with a coherent elevation system that all those benchmarks are tied to.
Thank you. I appreciate your explanation, but I guess I was really just wondering, because one of the concerns we had with the like-for-like ordinance is that some properties that were completely destroyed would have to be rebuilt at a higher elevation on the ground.
So those rebuilding requirements may be coming to FEMA and floodplain management concerns. And
So you know
I would
nothing about the higher levels now of the ground. You're just only dealing with where the markers are, not with the depth or the height or the...
So those would be topographic concerns, and after the debris flow, there was significant LiDAR flights and determination of what those floodplain management concerns might be for rebuilding. But our office has been primarily dealing with the right-of-way and the monumentation and the boundary framework that people are going to need to work
see,
with.
that isn't your
They'll
really your
hire
purview.
engineers and people to determine what can they build and how do they deal with those flooding elevation issues.
And Mr. Chair and Commissioner Keller, keep in mind we're working just in the public right-of-way, and we took all the debris out of the public right-of-way. So we're not going back into private property where debris may still be, or people haven't cleaned out their lots. So
Oh, I see. So the survey markers have nothing to do essentially with the question I was asking, which is the ending elevation of the property.
right, if a piece of private property is now higher today after the debris flow, we're not capturing that.
Sorry, I didn't realize
And,
that.
and
Thank
those
you.
may be captured through private survey means or other greater observations that are happening at the state and federal level.
Commissioner Kupiec?
So just from my own curiosity, because I go searching for this stuff all the time, so will the LiDAR map really be the replacement for the survey maps that are online, given by that are there from the county?
I think, again, we may be
This is
disconnecting-
topographic information.
So topographic information.
I mean, will topography maps ever really be upgraded, or do we go to the LiDAR map information to use that information as kind of our rough benchmark for where we are on a project before we
Sure.
get to
I
a
think
finer
Tom-
grain detail?
I think Tom may be able to speak to what's going to be adopted for elevation and topographic mapping.
Great.
Yes, so, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, so the new FEMA map, which is now under development has as a part of that a new LiDAR flight. So we will have captured the new ground topography, which has changed since the debris flow. And in fact, has changed since post-debris flow because there's been work in the public right-of-way, private land. But your topographic information is always a snapshot at a point in time. But that information has been acquired, and so FEMA will start doing their mapping, and we will get a new flood map that's based on new topography. That topography was flown sometime this year, and so that'll be available. And then those flood elevations that would be the baseline for what people have to build up to will be in a new published map. Until that time, we have the recovery mapping, which was based on the post 19 debris flow, and but those will be replaced probably in a 3-year period.
So they will replace, if I go online and I look for the county topographic maps, either the old ones are gonna get X'd out or updated, or it'll say, go see this map.
I think we have our topographic maps back from the 1960s still available for historic information, then into the 90s. And then depending on if we can get that information and publish it, we would gladly grab that new LiDAR, develop a topo map out of it and publish that. I think that would be helpful to everybody.
But one place of consistency would really be helpful. And I think it'd be good if some of the other agencies, like, the sewer department knows that they're reporting the same elevations that you are when we go looking for a sewer main.
One thing that's important, and Danielle mentioned that, is there is a shift in the datum. Everything has a reference point, and we have a new datum that was 1988, and I think we have even a newer one coming. So each of those topography maps show the datum, because if you go back to the 1960 topographic map and you go to our 1990s, they're different because the datum is different.
Right.
And
we've discovered that sometimes to our dismay.
Yes. And so you always have to be mindful of that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I would like to thank you for your report, and just add anecdotally a personal note of appreciation. I think the survey function within our public works is literally not all that visible to our community at large, but I can tell you from my personal rebuild experience, it is critical. And I think that those of you involved in this part of our public works are to be appreciated, much like the unsung hero on a baseball team, the catcher. When it came time for me to rebuild, I was fortunate that our survey, the private surveyor, found 2 markers from 1905 that were dug up and used, but I was impressed and wanted to share that the array of technical equipment, both in terms of laser equipment as well as the use of low-level drone equipment, was very impressive. And I hope that our county surveyors have that type of technology and equipment available to you and funding for it, because I think it's a wonderful service of critical importance to our community, whether one is rebuilding or building. So I want to thank you for that. And before we conclude, Commissioner Senor, you wanted to, Commissioner Puliche, excuse me.
Yes, I just wanted to make note that my long history of civil engineering projects over the years, most of my life, I've been witness to and participated in a lot of reconstruction of damaged communities and floodplain community damage. And I must say that I'm very impressed with the effort, the performance, and the success of the Public Works Department in the last 2 years and flood control. And it's just, it's nice to know that our community has such strong leadership, and all of you sitting at that table, we're very grateful. I want to tell you thanks a lot, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us this morning.
Well, thank you for coming, and we appreciate the information and update to our community and to us.
Chair Newman, before moving on, I would just recommend that you have the record reflect that there was an opportunity for public comment on this.
All right. All right. Thank you very much. Why don't we take just a brief recess of 7 to 8 minutes, and then we'll proceed with our agenda. All right, we're back on the record, reconvening the meeting of December 18, 2019. And with respect to our standard agenda, we'll proceed to the next item under item 2. I'm sorry, item 4 rather, excuse me.
So Chair Newman, I was remembered, it's been a long time since we met last, and yeah, a week. Lots happened in that week. So at our special hearing on December 12th in the evening, we did incorporate into that presentation how to interact with the Planning Department and the Montecito Planning Commission through the website. That may have accomplished the purposes of the planning website demonstration. If you would like further information on that, I'd be more than excited to walk you through the website today if you would like to have that. Otherwise, we did cover some of this under the special meeting on December 12th.
All right.
So I'm just seeking direction from the commission.
Are there particular comments, questions, or so on from the commission about the website? We'll go to those first.
Well, I thought Tess did a good job last week, and so I don't think you can match her performance anyway.
Well, we'll take that as a comment. Are there any questions? Commissioner Keller, your light's on.
Yes, only that, unfortunately, the way it was set up last week at the special meeting, we couldn't see the screen. So I trusted that Ms. Harris was showing us the way, but I didn't actually see the demonstration. However, I'm assuming that given that I have moved into the 21st century in some ways technologically, I can manage it. I'm just wondering if you're getting feedback about any particular problems that people are having with it. Have there been any issues or concerns raised that you feel could be improved upon with what you currently have?
Chair Newman, Commissioner Keller, yes to both those questions. So, sorry, it's been, so we have been getting feedback, and I encourage the members of the community and the commissioners to provide feedback. There is a link on the webpage. At the bottom right corner that talks about feedback. So if you would like to provide feedback on the webpage and how you find it helpful and encourage continued use of that with the community, please provide us any positive feedback there. If you have constructive feedback, you can also provide it there as well. So we are continually analyzing the effectiveness of the website and working with all the multiple divisions within the department and getting feedback. So it's an ongoing process of continuing to try to update it and adding new information to the website. There are some things that I can highlight on the homepage if you'd like, just to for members of the community that they can look at that's broader than what we covered on Thursday.
All right, any other comments or questions on the topic of the website? For myself, I just have one question. Does the department or does the IT folks, people at the county track clicks so we get a sense of how frequently the website is consulted and used?
Chair Newman, Members Commission, that is correct. We do have an ability to track different hits or clicks on certain web pages. And when we put this current version of the web page together, on the right-hand column where it says top 5 visited pages, those are the pages at the time that we were putting this together had received the most clicks. And so we are continually analyzing that. And as you know, we get information or input as far as what the community is accessing more frequently, we try to provide those links earlier on to allow people to access those things in a more efficient and streamlined manner.
All right, thank you for that. I would just also add, personally, I find it to be visually much more pleasing, and I think interactively it's certainly better and easier to navigate than prior iterations. But I know this is a work in process and will be developing, but I think this is a good step forward, so thank you and staff involved for that. All right, Commissioner Keller, you
I
had a
just
comment?
wanted, would you, for the record, restate the web address for us, please?
Chair Newman, members of the commission, the web address is countyofsb.org/plndev/home.sbc.
Would you repeat that, please?
Sure. Again, the website address is countyofsb.org/plndev/home. SBC.
Thank you.
And Chair New, if you want, I could just highlight a couple things on there if you just want a quick preview. Commissioner Keller, I know that on Thursday you indicated that there were some items that were not able to be viewed. Just really quickly, and the website is organized with a toolbar and 3 columns, and accessing the information can be accessed through using these toolbars along the top. And then along the left column, it has the quick links that identify one of those most frequently used aspects of the website as far as getting information quickly. The column in the middle is more of an informational column where we update different news and announcements that pertain to the department or new efforts that we're undertaking. Just informational items. We do have a banner that rotates that allows highlighting different aspects. Currently, this screen is showing the citizen access portal where members of the public can interact and look up building permits or planning permits and find out their status or do permit search. We're in the process of initiating an electronic plan review process both in the planning and development side, or the development review and building and safety. And then there's an ability to look at all our archived information online. And then if you're interested in anything related to cannabis regulation licensing, you can access it here. And then we wanted to continue to have our interactive map at the forefront, and there is a link here to access the interactive map for the Montecito debris flow. Our schedules for hearings are located in the right column, and then as we indicated earlier, these are the top 5 most visited pages to allow people to access those. So once you hit the home page, you can go to a lot of different things. As things relate to the members of the Montecito community, when we look at hearing bodies, when you look at this toolbar, the Montecito Planning Commission is listed under decision makers, and then Montecito BAR is located under Boards of Architectural Review, and any other committees that may be of interest are listed here. So part of the demonstration on Thursday night was if you could access the Montecito Planning Commission information by clicking under that toolbar. If you click here, it opens up into a box where you can access all the prior hearings. As you click further into that, you can go into the folders, and this is today's hearing, where you can access the agenda, any of the things that we talked about today. So that allows members of the commission as well as the public to access staff reports, agendas, any other items of interest that are on the Planning Commission. In addition, there's links to CSB TV archives that you can go back and look at prior hearings, and then if you want to watch the meeting live, you can do that as well. And then it just lists the members of the commission, and then some information as far as the roles and responsibilities of the Montecito Planning Commission. Same things apply to the Montecito BAR, is that you can access that information here as well. I know there was some conversations of trying to access BAR audio, and you can, hopefully it's there, you can see some of the minutes from that, and I think in some occasions that the audio is available there as well. So that in a nutshell, that's how you access the decision makers, Board of Architectural Review, projects across the thing. Again, you got long range planning, development review, energy, and environmental review documents. Code and policies, this is another important one, is if you go on to under code and regulations, land use code, as far as it applies to, and you scroll down, it applies to Montecito, you have the Montecito Land Use and Development Code, and then Article 2, where commissioners and members of the public can access that information. Again, this toolbar allows you to access the Montecito Community Plan, as well as the other comprehensive plan elements to look at, and then you can open up those documents there. And then permitting toolbar allows you to go to the permitting home, where you can interface with the Building Safety Division and Development Review and look up permit status on individual items. And you can just search applications down here, and it allows you to input either address or parcel number and pull up information that way in regards to permits. So most of that information is available through the toolbars. I encourage everybody to get familiar with it. As we talked about Thursday, the enforcement program is located here on toolbar, and as we indicated on Thursday, you can access that either by downloading a fillable form or phone. Here's the phone numbers for the enforcement and compliance staff, or you can submit a complaint online. So really briefly, that is a demonstration of the website. I know it was thrilling, and it'll be archived on the internet for further review.
Thank you.
Commissioner Senard.
Thank you very much for augmenting your December 12th presentation. The December 12th is now probably archived and can be accessed. So basically, this presentation you just gave dovetails with the more complete presentation. But thanks very much. It's very helpful.
Just quickly,
Excuse
please.
me. Oh, Commissioner Keller?
Sorry, just quickly, if you had been on our page and you had clicked on the live button, would we have been watching ourselves?
Journeyman Commissioner Keller, that is correct.
Aha, that would have been interesting.
And a question for Mr. Villalobos. When we send out communications to those who are on our email list to get the projection reports and the agendas, maybe it's already your practice to do so, do we have a link prominently displayed that says contact the Montecito Planning Commission, or Montecito Planning Commission information is found here, and that would enable people that get our subscribers, so to speak, to have that access?
So I'm sorry. My contact information is on the web page. So I've had conversations about this to make it a little bit more standard in terms of like what our long range planning division has been doing for their various projects, and the county has a system that they use, is MyEMA, I believe, in order to do that, and I've made the decision personally to not move our individual hearing bodies over there, because there was talk about perhaps changing the system, and I was just waiting to see if that was going to happen. But so it's a little bit more informal. People just contact me directly, and to be added to the Planning Commission agenda distribution list. Now, the projection report, if you look at it, you can see it was always designed really for the planners and for the Planning Commission in mind, and we have more members of the public have been asking to be put on that distribution list, but that's not something that we have historically advertised.
I would just suggest, consult with staff, but to the extent that we have limited resources for human staff, and to support our function and indeed the long-range planning function of the P&D department, and to the extent that this is becoming a great resource for our community and for others, the more we can push it out to the community with frequency, maybe we'll leave our staff of some undue burden, and you personally, but that's again a staff determination, but I would recommend it be seriously considered. All right, anything else on the website? Let the record reflect that I'm calling for, and there doesn't appear to be anybody interested in public comment. So we'll close that agenda item and then proceed last to agenda item 5.
The Montecito Planning Commission will have a brief workshop to discuss best practices for ongoing commission business.
Well, thank you for that. This is going to be a bit of a self-show and tell. For myself as chair, I thought I would share with both my colleagues and those who are watching or interested the process that I have gone through this past year as chair to prepare for meetings and what it has entailed. Very fond as I am of David Letterman's top 10 list, it just so happens there are 10 steps that I have taken throughout the year to prepare for and conduct each meeting that I thought I would share. First, as a first step, review the Montecito Planning Commission requests from prior meetings to determine whether any commissioner requests that have been requested for addition to the agenda have already been heard or should be heard. Second step, I look at the projection report provided by staff. And then the third step, an important one, is that I've scheduled and worked to schedule a meeting or at least a conference call with both our staff as well as our first vice chair to review the possible agenda items. Fourth step is to contact staff regarding any individual item that is on the projection report to get a sense of, one, its timing, importance, and so on. And then fifth is to receive and review and comment on a draft agenda that is received and to get input from council as necessary or staff. The sixth step is then the finalization of the agenda after that input's been received also from the first vice chair. And then the seventh step is to review the specific agenda items personally and to reach out to any staff member that's responsible for a given item with any questions that I might have about the particular item that's on the agenda. The eighth step, which I have found to be particularly useful on a personal level, is to then receive a Word copy of the agenda and to use that to make notes for myself and annotate that to include necessary procedural elements that need to be superimposed on the agenda and also to add any other important things that would be a reminder. And then lastly, I use that annotated Word document to conduct the meeting itself. So those steps, preparation with the assistance and input of first vice chair, who's been Commissioner Senauer this past year, and with staff, has proved useful to me, and I hope it's maybe a pathway for others to consider when they are called upon to serve. So unless there's any comments or suggestions on this topic, Commissioner Keller.
Oh, I thank you for outlining that. I don't think that anybody else has put it into 10 steps, but it's very thorough and very helpful. And I just wanted to mention that I think both Commissioner Senauer and I have made a real effort to make site visits whenever. You didn't mention the site visit aspect, but it has been very instructive to actually see the locations that we're talking about. On a few occasions, I've either intentionally or inadvertently met the people involved, and it gave us much more background with which to do our deliberations. And I think that all of us in our preparations should make an effort to incorporate that, because it was very helpful for me personally.
Thank you for that addition, of course. And of course, ex parte communications and visits, site visits and the like, are part of that process for all of us, whether serving as chair or as a member. All right, any other comments on this topic? Again, requesting but seeing nobody here for public comment, we'll close out that agenda item 5 under our standard agenda and then proceed to the very last agenda item, which is Commissioner's request for future agenda topics. So this is our open mic session, so to speak, for our colleagues. So if you have an item for consideration, please let us know. Commissioner Kupiec.
I would certainly like to agendize the item that we were talking about, that if work is going to go on Olive Mill Road and there's a pedestrian path to be constructed, that I think at least to be informed of where we are in that process, what's been planned, what does it look like? Is there going to be a way for us, if not, maybe it's our only body that's going to get a shot at, providing community input, but I'd certainly like to know what is proposed.
All right. Commissioner Puliche.
To augment what you said just now, I would think that if we can get an early warning of this project, we might be able to get some funding, private funding. I think that's probably the biggest stumbling block for Scott and his group, is being concerned about what it might cost. And so if we could provide private funding, it might relax and allow for more dialogue.
Commissioner Keller.
Because I'm piling on today on this particular topic, possibly what we can discuss is a process by which this should be done, because I think one of the most disturbing things about North Jameson was that it didn't come before the Planning Commission, it didn't come before the Board of Architectural Review, and I don't think there's any reason to do things quickly and cheaply if more process will give an opportunity, as Mr. Puliche said, to bring in outside funding, to have possible, new ideas or additional ideas about how it should be constructed. So I think that rather than just Public Works going ahead with something because they've gotten money from some individual group is not a way to handle projects in Montecito. I think there needs to be a process, because this is a community project. It needs to comply with the community plan, and it needs to have community input.
Commissioner Senor.
Yes, I concur with all commissioner comments. I would also, regarding the process, I think it's of import to distinguish what is within our purview and what is not. I think as far as informative, informational, community outreach is critical, but Public Works has an operation that is within their purview, and we as a decision-making body also have ours. And I think that is the difficult part of this. And I think that needs to be established very clearly, that truly Public Works projects are not to be reviewed by, well, they could be reviewed, but we are not a decision maker on it. So that's critical. Just wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
Mr. Wilson.
So, Chair, new members, Commission, we can't discuss this too much further as we're not agendized to discuss this. And so just a follow-up on the informational report that was given. Public Works do, and Commissioner Sinauer indicated it adequately, is there's an intersection between where the Montecito Planning Commission and the Public Works. And there are going to be some instances where there isn't an intersection between Public Works and the review authority of the Montecito Planning Commission. And I think that's where the rub is, I'm hearing today. So we could put it on an agenda as far as identifying what that is. And as indicated under that information report today that's on the agenda, Public Works did indicate that there were some spectrum of work that they are due within the right-of-way that don't require a permit or a review, or there's a process. So I understand the frustration that we're hearing today, but we can bring that back to on an agenda and share with the Commission where in the ordinance those things fall.
Commissioner Keller, is your lights on next?
Thank you. Yes, may I just ask, is not the Public Works limited, ruled by the community plan, even if it's in a public right-of-way? Mm-hmm. I mean, there are very specific guidelines in the community plan and architectural guidelines. And so I think that's why we need to talk about process and not just the MPC input, but the MBAR input. And I don't know how to go about that. It needs to be an agenda item, obviously, but it would be great if we could get the MBAR also. So there's a more comprehensive approach, because I feel very strongly that even if things are in the public right-of-way, the community plan should be controlling.
Let me make this suggestion, which I'm hearing, that we consider agendizing for a workshop in the future, a discussion about the jurisdiction of our commission vis-a-vis public works and perhaps other areas, and just approach it in that general sense and drill down on it as necessary, but maybe do it in a workshop mode at a future meeting if I'm getting the sense of the commission. Commissioner Kupiec?
Yeah, I'm happy to do it in that in that methodology, but I want to make sure that this is brought to the commission as a sense of urgency. This is happening as we speak, and unless this comes before us quickly, we will not have a chance to energize our community members to weigh in and be part of it. I assure you, there is not a single person on Olive Mill Road who knows this is going on. And they are all homeowners. We're all in the community. We all drive up and down Olive Mill Road all the time. You know, and I got to tell you, every time I drive down North Jameson, I have one side of me that, you know, wants to pat the bucket brigade on the back, and I have the other side of me that wants to kick them in the behind. Because I think there was a tremendous missed opportunity there to do something great. And I'm only interested in great. I'm not interested in, I mean, I only sit here because we're interested in propagating really good things, not mediocrity.
Okay. All right. Commissioner Palucci.
Sure. I think that it might be advantageous with the present setup as far as jurisdiction for the chair to have a working relationship that was routinely having dialogue with the Public Works Director, and so that we wouldn't necessarily miss anything. If we can keep a kind of conversation alive with them, we might be able to work within the system as it's presently established. And I think that having them here today, we learned something, and I think informal meetings with the chair or somebody assigned from our group to meet with Public Works might be an appropriate way to keep us warm to the ideas of what they're coming up with.
Commissioner Senard.
Yes, I agree with both commissioners on progressing on this item quickly, because I think it could actually be happening very soon. And I think whether it's a workshop or one-on-one with the chair or the vice chair or whoever, I would prefer a workshop, and I would prefer it ASAP. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for comments on that. Are there any other commissioner requests for future agenda topics at meetings in the future? Okay, hearing none.
I'm sorry, but
Oh,
separate and apart from
Commissioner
this
Keller.
separate and apart from this urgent issue, I liked your suggestion of a workshop about jurisdiction in general. So that would be two different agenda items. One would be, and I don't think any of us know what our ability is in terms of interacting as quickly as possible with Public Works, and I would rely on staff and our county council to help guide us in a way where we might have input or make sure there is public input prior to anything being done. But separate and apart from that, a meeting about jurisdiction or an agenda item about jurisdiction would be helpful.
All right. Are there any other commissioner suggestions for future meeting topics?
Well, I just
that
want to
help?
chime in on
Commissioner Kupiec,
I just want to chime in
microphone.
on what Ron just said. I mean, I think that that's really a wonderful suggestion, and it's not as if there has to be some exhaustive, overview of what they're doing. But I think if things are happening at Public Works that kind of fall into that public realm area, that really are amenities for the public. I mean, we're not talking about narrowing the roadway or, doing their metrics. But when something happens like this, that it really is a public amenity. It's something that, the community uses, and we're going to get a chance. And the community plan has always been a suggestive of making us more pedestrian friendly and having walkways. But I think we only need to know when something like that is on the horizon.
Okay. All right, thank you. Any other topics that any other commissioners would like to propose for future agendas? No? Okay, hearing none. We've now come to the end of our meeting, and before we adjourn, I'd like to wish both my colleagues and staff that all the best for the holidays. Hope that they're joyous and a time of festivity and relaxation, and that we're looking forward to working in the next calendar year with you. And thank you for all your efforts in this calendar year. So without further ado, I believe we'll be adjourned until our next meeting. Thank you.